This webinar will introduce you to the latest alarming data from 1961 to 2022. First, you will hear from the team who produced this data and how they produced it and what they found. Then you will hear about York University's global research partnerships to advance this work. And finally, you'll hear from our distinguished guest, Mathis Wackernagel. My name is Mike Layton. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at York University. I will moderate today's webinar and introduce our speakers. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous people. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit, First Nations, and this territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region, and whose fundamental principle is leaving a sustainable footprint. About 30 years ago, the term ecological footprint was described as a way of measuring humanity's appropriation of the Earth's carrying capacity. Since then, it has evolved to include a comprehensive system of national and international accounts. These accounts provide valuable insight about humanity's use of lands and water. The accounts help countries and communities to engage with sustainability and to make informed decisions about the future. In the last 5 years, York University has become the global hub for producing the accounts and for researching ways to make them even more comprehensive. York integrates this work into its graduate program in environmental studies through a training program in sustainability informatics. This program trains students to engage with large environmental data sets and to apply this pressing issue of sustainability. This training empowers them with a valuable set of skills and knowledge, which positions them well to make a difference in the world. York is pleased to produce the accounts for the Footprint Data Foundation and its partnership with the Global Footprint Network. York is renowned for its partnerships, being recognized globally through the Times Higher Education ranking and by other ranking organizations. And York is committed to helping the world succeed in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For the world is to succeed, it must have timely data that can be scaled nationally and also locally and globally. We produce such data. It is timely and it is scalable. It's my pleasure to introduce you the team who produced this new edition of the accounts. Eric Miller is the director of the Ecological Footprint Initiative. And over the last 11 months, Eric has worked with Sila Basturk, Peri Dworatzek, and Athavan Nithanantha. Let's hear from them about what they found, and then let's hear from Katie Kish, who is the Development Officer of the Ecological Footprint Initiative, focusing on research partnerships.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be joined by Sila and Peri with you in real time here. Our other co-producer, Athavan, was not able to make it to this webinar today. So the four of us produced the 2023 edition of the National Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. I'll start off just by reflecting on the definition of an ecological footprint and its relationship to measuring sustainability. And so the ecological footprint is a measure of the area of land and water that is needed to provide us with food, renewable materials, settlements, and carbon emissions. It is very comprehensive, and it's for that reason that the world has been using this set of information to help inform it about the challenges and opportunities in relation to sustainability. Ecological footprint is detailed into various components that reflect land use and land cover. And this is a very useful way of integrating various components in consistent units of accounts. So the ecological footprint includes the component of what we call fishing grounds. And so the fishing grounds refer to the area of marine and inland waters that are used to produce the fish invertebrates, and aquatic plants that were captured or cultured by humans. It also includes the built-up land component, which is the area of land occupied by human-built infrastructure, including housing and other buildings, roads, and paved areas, and urban green space. It also includes the cropland component, which is the area of cropland used to grow food and fiber crops consumed by humans, and for crops that animals fed to humans, to animals and to cultured fish as well. We include the grazing land component, which is the area of grassland needed to feed livestock beyond the feed that is supplied by crops. There's the forest products component, which is the area of forests harvested for timber products and for pulpwood. And there's also the forest carbon uptake component, which is the area of forests that are needed to sequester anthropogenic carbon emissions from the combustion of fuels, including for electricity generation and for the production and transportation of globally traded goods, minus the proportion of anthropogenic emissions that were sequestered in the same year by the world's oceans. All of these components are then summed up together to generate the statistic of ecological footprint. Ecological footprint, therefore, is the area needed, the minimum area needed to sustain us with the flows of goods and services from ecosystems close to us and around the world. This ecological footprint measure can be compared to biocapacity. Biocapacity is the area that's available to sustain us. We measure biocapacity in comparable components in order to evaluate and compare them to footprint. Ecological footprint and biocapacity can be compared to each other because we derive these metrics in units of global hectares. A global hectare is a hectare of land or water that provides the world average amount of biological regeneration in each year. And by having these represented in global hectares, we can make comparisons across the planet and across time to help inform us with this preemptive measure of sustainability. So it's with this framework that, that my team here has produced this new 2023 edition of National Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. And so over the last 11 months, the four of us have been laboring away, integrating lots of data from the top world sources of information relevant to this exercise. And after integrating about 50 million rows of data, we're able to generate graphs such as the following, which report on the ecological footprint divided by biocapacity in each of the years from 1961 to 2022. You've got a horizontal line here on the screen, as you can see, at that level of 1. Every instance where the ecological footprint is greater than biocapacity would be above that line of 1, and that corresponds to the overshoot of ecological footprint as compared to biocapacity. And so after all of our work, we're able to share with you the first graph from the results of the 2023 edition of the Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. And this is what it looks like from that period onwards.
Now, what happens in 2020, a year I'm sure we all remember as being significantly different because of the global pandemic? 2020 marks the largest drop in ecological footprint in all of the data years since 1961, a bigger drop than any other international or global event that affected economic activity. The massive reduction in emissions and other consumption in 2020 because of the pandemic pushed ecological footprint levels around to where they were in 2007.
After the significant drop in 2020, our footprint has jumped back. In 2021 and 2022, the footprint records were close to the 2019 levels. However, the level of increase was limited compared to the escalation we observed after other historical breaking points, such as the 2008 economic crisis.
This graph presents the global picture of ecological footprint and biocapacity. So now let's turn to the national picture.
So this is derived from what we call the National Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. These accounts are international because they report on in this case, for this edition, 244 territories, including the world as a whole. They are international because they include data from all of these countries, and they're all integrated in similar units of ecological footprint and biocapacity, and so they're all comparable. Out of all these countries, there are some of these countries that do not have sufficient information for us to be able to detail all the components of ecological footprint and biocapacity, but from this list, we are able to complete full set of accounts over this time period, or the time period relating to the country's existence, for 190 countries plus the world total as well. And so in these national accounts, for these countries that we have here, we have detailed the ecological footprint related to various components of production and consumption. So we have ecological footprint of production and imports and exports. And what we mean by that is it's the ecological footprint that's embodied within the imports to a country in a certain year, and also the ecological footprint embodied within the exports from that country in that year. And so by having these accounts detail the ecological footprint of production and imports and exports, we can do a bit of math on this to sum imports plus production minus exports to derive the ecological footprint of consumption. That is to say, the ecological footprint corresponding to all that was consumed within a country in a particular year. In these accounts, we represent or we integrate all of our data, and we represent the results using various consistent metrics. Of course, we're dealing with areas of lands and waters, and so we do have information, of course, about the hectares corresponding to all of these. And we, of course, generate results in global hectares, as I mentioned, to be able to compare across countries, across time, and so on. We also generate results in units of global hectares per capita, which makes it really, valuable to be able to make comparisons within a country and across countries, since some countries have more people than others. And so not surprisingly, the ecological footprint of some countries is much larger than the ecological footprint of other countries. But by providing results in units of global hectares per capita, we can make comparisons across a planet on an average per person basis comparing countries. Here's a graph where we're going to show you all the countries of the world arranged from the highest to the lowest per capita ecological footprint of consumption, with the units on the y-axis here being the global hectares per capita in the year 2022. Now, a few things to keep in mind, as we've already presented to you in the global picture. If you look at the amount of global biocapacity there is on this planet, and if you were to divide that evenly between all of the humans that existed in 2022, we end up with there being about 1.5 global hectares per person of global biocapacity. As we showed on the timeline, the ecological footprint in 2022 is in excess of biocapacity. If you take the ecological footprint of humanity divided by the number of humans, you get the global ecological footprint per capita of 2.6 global hectares. And then on top of this, we can share with you the distribution of the ecological footprint of consumption per capita of all the countries that we've measured. And this is what it looks like. As you can see, even when we measure ecological footprint on a per capita basis, there's a tremendous difference across the planet as to the likelihood of a person being in a country with a higher or lower ecological footprint as compared to the world average and as compared to the world per capita level of biocapacity. You can see from this that there are more countries in the world where the residents within those countries on a per person basis have an ecological footprint that's less than the world average. Ecological footprint is concentrated in a comparatively smaller group of countries that have a per capita level above the world average of 2.6. Data like this and the more detailed data on a country-specific basis are available in the data set of National Ecological Footprint and Biocapacity accounts that we're so very proud to share with you at this moment and starting on this day. So there are a number of features of this new 2023 edition that we're really excited to tell you about. So we're going to share some of these exciting developments right now.
The most significant update to the accounts this year is the incorporation of estimates beyond nationally reported data. In previous editions, the account's last year of data was a few years behind of the edition year, whereas for this edition, it includes data up to 2022. The extension follows a similar methodological estimate that are done to other aspects of the accounts, with an enhanced methodology for the carbon footprint linked to GDP growth, change in carbon intensity of economy, subcomponents such as emissions of industrial and fugitive, and global trade trends.
Another update to this edition of the accounts is enhanced coverage of fish consumption. In this edition, a new data source was included from the sea around us. This source includes data on capture and aquaculture that is unreported by countries. So in some cases, this has significant effects for certain countries, particularly in the earlier data years around 1960s and 1970s.
A third update to this edition is the integration of the planetary sequestration data from the global carbon budget. This new data source enhances the forest carbon uptake component and has a large overall impact on the footprint.
Another update to this edition is increased consistency and concordance with nationally reported land data. This edition prioritizes data sources that derive area data from a consistent methodology of land use rather than land cover, ensuring a greater consistency overall in methodology for the footprint.
Another key feature of this 2023 edition is improved consideration of national crop intensity, reflecting multi-cropping. Based on the combination of climate and farming practices, we see around the world different extents to which countries intensively use their cropland. In other words, how many yields of crops they're able to derive within the course of a year, and the extent to which some cropland is not harvested for crops in a certain year so as to regenerate its fertility and so on. And so we make greater use of information about that in this edition of the accounts, with the consequence that the crop land component has some changes depending on the country, depending upon the year, depending upon the extent to which its crop intensity differs as compared to the world average crop intensity. And this also has a bit of a ripple effect onto the grazing land component because of the interrelationships with cropland, and also some consequences on the built-up component because of the interrelationships in our accounts with the built-up land component. So these are key features of this 2023 edition, but we also reacquired all the data for the entire timeline and made some additional smaller scale enhancements and improvements. And so we're really excited to share this with you and for you to be able to engage in this data to help you and to help your organizations to engage the world on a much more sustainable and positive future. So with these additions, or with these features of this edition, there's all kinds of information that's accessible to help you and your organizations engage with this information. Results are detailed per year and per country. And so just as an example to show you the level of detail for Canada for the year 2022, here's a sampling of data that's available for you to engage with in this year, or if you want to engage with it in prior years or make comparisons to see the evolution of ecological footprint and biocapacity in Canada or in another country, you can make that comparison by engaging with the details. So in this case for Canada, we account for the area of lands and waters that provide us with biocapacity in those components that are identified earlier on in the definition of ecological footprint. And it's from that Canada has a very high level of ecological footprint of production, which corresponds to the footprint of all the activities that happened in Canada in that year. In other words, all that was produced. There's, of course, in Canada, we about a third of all the stuff that we consume is imported from the rest of the world. And so we have the ecological footprint embodied within the imports into Canada. And we also have the statistics about the ecological footprint embodied within exports from Canada to the rest of the world. As you can see from here, Canada's ecological footprint within exports is more than twice as much as the ecological footprint of its imports. For those of you in Canada, it's perhaps not too surprising. After all, Canada exports a lot of footprint-intensive things like a lot of forest products, and in exchange, it imports a lot of footprint lighter things such as software, medical patents, and that sort of thing, streaming services, and so on from other countries in the world. So on a net basis then, when we add in the ecological footprint of imports to production, subtract the ecological footprint of exports, we end up with the ecological footprint of consumption in global hectares. Canada's ecological footprint of consumption in global hectares on a per capita basis is among the highest in the world. This is perhaps not surprising to those of you on this call if you've engaged with this data before. Nevertheless, the ecological footprint associated with all the production that takes place in this country is even higher, putting an even higher toll onto the biodiversity within Canada and the lands and waters within this country. So if you're interested in engaging with details like that, we welcome you to engage with the data. There's various ways to engage with the data. You can engage with the data through the York University site footprint.info.yorku.ca, where after this webinar, we will update the data page to have available for you the 2023 edition of the accounts from 1961 to 2022. And that's very, this sort of full set of data is more geared towards those of you who are more interested and more used to working with it in Excel and deriving infographics from raw data and so on. So we've got an Excel workbook with all these details like what we had shared with you on this presentation. Now, very important in the distribution of this data is engaging with the data through data.footprintnetwork.org. Our partners at the Global Footprint Network have an amazing open data platform that allows you to very simply engage with the country level data by clicking on the country on the map and getting information about that country and the trends over time, and also being able to make comparisons with other countries and to be able to integrate other data sets into this as well, things like population, GDP, looking at trends and so on between ecological footprint and the Human Development Index, for example. So very excited to, of course, be working in partnership with the Global Footprint Network and to have them as being such an awesome engager of the world with this information, using it in such valuable campaigns such as Ending Earth Overshoot Day, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with.